Hello and welcome to Women of Worth Wednesday. I'm Ganel-Lyn, your host, and I'm so excited to be with you today to share a message that I need. And I love when I can share a message that it's right where I'm at in my life, because I hope the spirit of the authenticity of that comes through. But before I jump into today's message, I wanted to personally thank all of you that have reached out and responded to our Women of Worth Wednesday interview with Shantae and Alexis last week. It has been phenomenal. I don't know, my last count was 30,000 views on one platform, and I know they've gotten so many wonderful, loving responses from our viewers. And I just wanted to publicly acknowledge and thank the generosity of spirit and love that you show our guests here on High Five Live. And so as you're chiming in or tuning in live, would you let us know where you're watching from? And just a heartfelt thanks for those that received this really sensitive conversation and you stuck with us. It was a 90-minute Women of Worth. I think we broke records and the numbers were phenomenal. And so I'm just grateful that we're having these conversations here at High Five Live. And I am committed to continuing that on Women of Worth Wednesday. As we go through and prepare for the Savior to come, things will be intense at times. And as you look at the Book of Mormon and you see the pattern before the Savior came and all of the wars between the different tribes, the ites, I like to call it, it can feel disheartening and it can feel scary. I know I have been in that place of what can I do to help? And I've tried to be really introspective the last few months. Even before COVID-19, I could feel the beginning of the year was just a little weird and bumpy for me. But I was reflecting a lot and I never quite could get my rhythm. And then by the middle of March, the whole world stopped because of COVID. And now, especially in America, we're dealing with intense conversations around race. And we're trying to be honest and we're trying to find solutions, and everyone's approaching it very differently. I don't know about you, but my social media feeds are intense, back and forth postings, likings, comments. I've been a public figure for the last 6-7 years, and so I'm used to getting feedback. Sometimes that's really lovely and very supportive, and other times I am given feedback that is not loving and is not kind. And it's always surprising to me, especially on some of my platforms or my shows that I do that are very faith focused, how people of faith don't always lead out with that faith, right? We're human beings and our faith doesn't make us perfect. It's a process of becoming, right? Like our Savior. And so it's in the spirit of that I wanted to share a message today. So I co-host a Come Follow Me show called Real Talk Come Follow Me. My co-host is Scott Sorensen, and he will eventually be a guest with me on Women of Worth Wednesday. And I know you will, if you've tuned into our Real Talk show, you already have a sense of his heart and his spirit. And I love co-hosting this show with him. We're currently working on a project for next year for the DNC. And so we've spent a lot of time discussing the scriptures and writing and editing and all of those things. And in our conversation last week, Scott shared something with me that I want to give him credit for. And it stopped me in my tracks, because I'm going to admit that through the last few months through COVID and then some earthquakes, and now I just saw the news showing that there's crickets in 3 Utah counties where it's an infestation. There's killer hornets in Washington. And the riots and some of the other news headlines are really heavy. And I've noticed something about myself, that when my vulnerability gets high, some of my old trauma thinking comes back. And I think one of the things as human beings that we aren't comfortable with, it is the idea of being misunderstood. But as a speaker and author and media contributor, I'm on live TV and live radio once a month. I host multiple shows and I speak publicly. And then I write books that are in print for a long time. It's a lot of content, never mind sharing on my other platforms, just daily uplifting content and content that's funny sometimes and just real life. But it's a lot of output. And I feel this is a mission, and so I know who my boss is, but I'm a human being. And some of the negative feedback I've gotten over the years has been hurtful. But beyond that, it's very anxiety provoking at times to consider going live and sharing my heart and hoping I'm not misunderstood. And I was having a conversation with Scott about our show and the comparisons we get with other Come Follow Me shows, which we now kind of just chuckle at because we get some comments pretty regularly, and now it's become kind of an inside funny joke instead of being triggered by it. But he was sharing with me this thought, and it stopped me. And that is that Jesus was okay with being misunderstood. Think about that for a minute. Think about within the context of your work, your family, your social media sharing. Maybe you're a full-time missionary watching this. Maybe you're going to share this with a full-time missionary that you love. Whether you're a speaker, a teacher, a civic leader, a policeman, whatever it is, when we put ourselves out there, it's vulnerable. People have opinions, a lot of opinions. And in the day and age of social media, we feel like we can comment on that. And when Scott shared that thought with me, we sat there for a minute and we talked about it. What if Jesus was paralyzed with the idea of being misunderstood? What if Jesus had decided that to serve his mission, to serve his Father, he had to come to earth and he had to convince everybody that he was not only the Son of God, but that he was about peace and love, that he was willing to search the one of the 99, that he cared about the leper and the adulterer and the child and the sinner and the Pharisee? What if he spent so much time chasing down the rumors that were spreading about him? We see that in the scriptures where he does a healing and he warns the person that he heals, don't go back to town and tell everyone. I think he knew what was coming. He said, go to the temple and let the priests declare that you're clean. And instead, that's not what happened. Jesus was misunderstood. And yet we are frozen and sometimes paralyzed in our own missions on earth for fear of being misunderstood. I love the conversation last week on Women of Worth because Shantae, Alexis, and I really had a desire to talk about some of those things that get misunderstood. And we didn't do it perfectly, but we tried. And I'm not saying that you get up every day and you don't try to be aware and sensitive to others, because I think that that's literally, that awareness was Jesus. He knew why the woman at the well had struggled before he even talked with her. He knew the woman caught in adultery, why she was there. He understood why the Pharisees were afraid of kind of opening the floodgates and inviting everyone into the temples and synagogues to worship. He understood. I'm not saying we're not sensitive to one another. I'm saying, is there something you're stopping yourself from doing or sharing or asking because you're so afraid of being misunderstood? It will freeze me from moving forward in my mission that I feel very much called to do if I get too caught up in what is everyone thinking. I just did live TV yesterday, and I've made a rule to not judge how I did until I rewatch the tape, because usually my family and friends will say, how did it go? How did it go? And there's a delay, and when I watch it back, it's always different than what I feel when I'm on set doing it live. When I'm on set doing it live, I never feel super great about it. I know how fast the 4.5 minutes can go. I know what parts we didn't hit, or maybe where my lips got caught on my braces or whatever that is. And so I try really hard to not overly judge myself until I rewatch it. And then I'm telling you, every time I put something out there, I'm my worst judge, right? And I've come to understand that if I'm going to continue with the way in which I'm trying to show up in the world, I can't be paralyzed by being with the fear that I might be misunderstood. But listen, it doesn't always work. I oftentimes have a broken heart because I realize I've hurt someone and I don't intentionally mean to. I just gave a fireside this last weekend with Hank Smith and Alex Boyer and John Hilton. It was a wonderful opportunity. The feedback was beautiful and loving. I shared some personal stories because I value doing that. But in putting myself out there, I open myself to be misunderstood. And one viewer was triggered by something I said, and she messaged me on social media, and sometimes it ends well and sometimes it never gets resolved. I feel like this conversation ended well, and I tried to share my thoughts, but think about how much we're communicating via messenger, text, on social media, and we're making up these stories in our heads about each other. I love the idea that the Savior didn't chase down every rumor about himself. I made a quick list of ways in which he was misunderstood. If you read the book of Job, you see that the characteristic of God is misunderstood, right? I think that's just one unique experience where you can see where someone's going through a hard time and everyone's kind of vilifying God, and God's sitting there saying, Job, this is for a reason, and I love you and I haven't stopped looking out for you. In Matthew 28:18, we see that the Savior had the highest authority, and yet in humility, he very much walked the earth. And he served the least. And people didn't understand that. They thought that the king of the Jews, that the Savior, the Messiah, was going to come and he was going to solve all the political issues of the time. And he didn't. He came and he saved us, but not the way many believed the Savior would save. And yet it was the higher, holier way. I think as you read the Lord's Prayer, there's this blessing that we ask for, that we will forgive those that trespass us. And we ask that those that we trespass against or our trespasses will be forgiven. All of us misunderstand others. We think we understand why someone is showing up the way they do. We think we understand why our spouse or our kids or our coworkers or our neighbors or our ward members are doing what they're doing, posting what they're doing. But what I've learned, especially in the last few weeks, that what our world needs is more of sitting down and saying, can you help me understand? Because the story in my head is this. As I've been working on this DNC book, I've been reading so much about the prophet Joseph, and I think he's one of the top characters and individuals of the latter days that has been misunderstood. His name is known for good and for evil. And I think about even as Christ taught his and worked with his disciples, they didn't always understand him. His best friends, the people that were with him all the time, questioned, Lord, why are you doing this? They didn't understand why he was sleeping when there was a storm. He didn't come from that nap and calm the ocean and say, you guys just don't get me. That's not what the records say. So my invitation to all of us is to consider that as the Savior was crucified, that exemplifies more than anything else his willingness to be misunderstood. His gift to us on the cross and in the garden, to me, gives us permission to go through life, doing our mission the best we can imperfectly, being the parents and sisters and daughters and mothers and wives and cousins and friends of one another. And we do it imperfectly, and we will be misunderstood. My prayer is that I continue to be more concerned with what God thinks of me than what anything comes through on social media. And one of the things that I love to tell myself when I get triggered by someone or something is that triggers are teachers. I'm not great at this. I'm sharing this message because it's a reminder to me that if I'm really trying to be like Jesus, part of that will be that I will be misunderstood. And you will be too. I know the desires of my heart. I know that I wish at times I was an angel, like Alma said, so that the things I share may be more clear. But then I look at some of the great angel stories and realize that they had to be bold, and maybe they weren't always understood as well. Can we just, as a Woman of Worth Wednesday community and family, take upon ourselves the invitation or challenge this week to be okay with being misunderstood, to not spend too much energy trying to chase down everyone's post or like or dislike of our posts or argue our way through everything in life? Can we just let people have their feelings and have their thoughts, understanding that their understanding is based on their life experience and our understanding is based on ours? And like I said, I'm not saying that we don't try to have civil conversation and resolve misunderstandings. I'm saying that Jesus didn't spend his time on earth trying to fix what everyone thought of him. He very much spoke the truth, whether it was with the Pharisees that were trying to bait him, or with his disciples as he was in the garden, asking them to please stay awake with him for a time. He went forward and did what he came to earth to do, and he was misunderstood. I would pose the thought that he's the most misunderstood. And that as we come to rely on him and to become like him, we too will be misunderstood. And I think that's when we get the opportunity to quickly forgive, as Nephi did to his brothers. They misunderstood him so often, and he quickly forgave them. Eventually, God said, Nephi, it's time to leave. It's not a healthy boundary any longer for you to stay. And maybe God is saying that to you, that the relationships we have in our lives sometimes reach a fever pitch, or they reach a point where God has said, you've learned all you need to learn, and it's no more helpful for you to be here. It's time to leave. And so please don't misunderstand this message. I would just hope and pray that it sinks into your heart that the next time you're misunderstood, and you don't mean to hurt someone, but they take it that way, that you will quickly forgive and know that you're in good company, that our Savior understands. I hope you feel the love of this message. I thank you for the support you give this show every week and this page, High Five Live. And I invite you to share this message with anyone that might need it, that may feel triggered by all that is playing out in the world right now, that they feel maybe hurt because they're not being understood. They're in good company as well. And we'll see you again next week here on Women of Worth Wednesday.